So months ago, I embarked on this little journey to review every major Wizard of Oz movie, and I started with Lewis, and I uploaded a few parts to it, and then being in my early 20s, I had a bit of a crisis happen. It's a very transitional period, so I kind of dropped it for a little bit. But now I'm ready to upload more of them. Sorry it took so long. I've been very busy, very productive, very busy guy, doing very productive, important stuff. I don't care if it's been 5 months. She's gonna text me back. Just trust me. No, but really, you can all calm down now. I know you've been clamoring for this. You've been awake at night, unable to sleep because you couldn't see the rest. I'm editing it right now, and since I'm so generous, I'm gonna upload all the remaining parts into one long video because there's no point spacing them out at this point because the upload flow of them, like the flow of them, it's kind of ruined now because I took so long. But yeah. Let's get it. I'm a pro editor. So yeah, enjoy or don't. Doesn't matter. I don't care. So I guess outside of Tin Man, we can move on to the whole lion sequence.
Yeah,
So
the lion is like my least favorite. I just don't know. I don't know if it's like looking back at it. I don't know if it's just like a product of its time or a type of comedy of its time. But I never really found him funny. And although my mum thought he was hilarious as a child, like when I was a child, so but I don't like find him funny, and it just kind of annoys me how much he's a coward, but it annoys me how much of a coward he is, I guess.
oh yeah, I have like a whole spiel about the lion because it's interesting because I think he's maybe one of the most famous parts of the movie because people love to imitate him. People get a kick out of it, and he has some of the most quoted lines in the movie. So I think he's really added a lot to the iconicness of the movie, and I think Burt Lore his talent really showed in his comedy, and I mean all three of them did a great job doing such a good and committed, energetic performance, even in all those outfits. And I think of the scene where he runs out and just crashes through the window. Like it's pretty impressive that he did that and all that
Yeah, that
costume, and I just find that funny in general. But as funny as he can be, it really does sacrifice him as a character.
yeah, because it doesn't really seem a character. It's like almost like a comedian from themselves, almost like
Yeah,
it,
exactly. It's sort of the equivalent of how so many movies now, like they'll have a voice actor or something to that effect, and it's just the comedian being themselves.
yes, yeah, definitely.
We don't
Um,
notice it now because Burt Lore wasn't some huge comedian that would be equivalent to what we see now. Like we don't see Burt Lore movies and go, "Oh, he's just being Burt Lore." But I think back then that kind of would be the equivalent to that.
yeah, yeah, like, oh, having said that, it's just giving me a horrible premonition. Although I know people in America generally quite like him, but in the UK we tend to hate James Corden, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I could see James Corden being cast as a lion and just
Oh
being
my god.
it probably would.
He kind of looks like him actually.
Yeah, I mean he was in Cats as well, um, so I guess it's kind of the similar stuff. But yeah, that was another. I think in most films that James Corden's been in, he kind of plays himself. But
Yeah, I could totally see them doing that if they did like a musical version.
mm,
But yeah, the lion I think
it's what you said. It's the most egregious example of the other two not living up to Scarecrow's character because the lion never really develops or has an arc. He's like the Scarecrow. We see he has a brain. We see he's really smart and just overall a good person, and that his insecurity isn't right. We see that Tin Man. There's not as many examples, but we see Tin Man cry and be sensitive. In the book, we see all three of them display brains, heart, and courage all the time. And it's this huge part of the story that you do have all this stuff, and it's just yourself. It's just you doubting yourself, but you have all this stuff all along, and you're smart enough, you're empathetic enough, you're brave enough. It's a huge part of the story. But the lion actually is a coward.
Yeah, it's like they misinterpreted the assignment. He's called the Cowardly Lion. He's like, oh, I have to be a coward throughout the whole film. But I don't know if that's necessarily his fault or the writer's fault. But yeah, he doesn't
It's
really.
definitely the writer's fault more so. But I think the worst example, it wouldn't be that bad. It wouldn't really be a problem at all if it weren't for when they're going to save Dorothy. Even
Yeah,
then, he chickens out multiple times and is just completely unwilling until he's forced to do something.
yeah. Uh, it's just well, like the good thing about Lion being my least favorite character is his "If I Only Had the Nerve" song is cut short. But then the bad side of that is he gets his own song later on, which we'll talk about when we get to.
Oh yeah, that'll be an interesting discussion. But yeah, I don't know. The lion, I do really enjoy his character. I think he's funny. Not as funny as people make him out to be, but I see the humor. But
Yeah,
yeah, like he's just not as they kind of undermine the whole point of the moral by making him so cowardly, actually cowardly. The only thing I could kind of salvage out of that is the wizard kind of gives this speech about how being scared isn't so bad because it just makes him smart. And I think that's kind of a good point. Like, okay, it's not bad to be afraid. It just makes you smart, and you want to avoid danger. But I still think, despite that it does undercut the whole moral that these characters had what they were looking for all along.
yeah, definitely.
The song, I think, is a really good example of how the lyricists for this song, for all these songs, they did a good job of pseudo rhyming words that don't actually rhyme.
Yeah, especially with I feel like especially with rhymes, and as well, I feel well. The only other example that I could think about was Willy Wonka, but I feel like you don't get this in films now, where you have one song repeated several times, but the lyrics change for each. Like in Willy Wonka, the Oompa Loompas sing like the same song like 5 times every time a child gets axed. But you wouldn't really see it in a musical, I don't feel today. But
Yeah.
it's nice. I suppose it's different. You don't really see it that often. It's one of those things that hasn't been done to death. So it's nice that there's all three of them have their own song, and it's the same song, but it's just different lyrics.
Yeah. The musicality of this movie is pretty unique, actually, because when people say they hate musicals, The Wizard of Oz is usually an exception, and people always forget really that The Wizard of Oz even is a musical. And I think maybe that's because it's not so much in a lot of more newer musicals, like sometimes it can seem like they stop the plot to have the
Mm.
song, but all the songs in this movie very much advance the plot.
Yes.
It's sort of methodical in that sense, and it's also unique in the fact that after the King of the Forest's whole sequence, there's not another musical number, and in pretty much every other musical ever made, there's always like a finale, like musical number. But with this movie, the musical numbers just sort of peter out.
Mm. Yeah, it's
They
funny
just
because
don't
I
happen again.
never really thought of this as a musical, but it very clearly is. And it must be for those reasons you've just said. It's just like I don't lump it in my head with like if I say, "Oh, I want to listen to musicals," I don't think, "Oh, Wizard of Oz is a musical."
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe part of it too is the musical aspect of it feels sort of subtle. It doesn't feel as
Yeah,
flashy and kind of as dancey as um, some of like most musicals. I think. I know there was going to be a reprisal of Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead at the end, so I guess that would have been the closest thing that there was,
uh,
but that was cut.
right. Okay, when she kills the witch, I'm guessing.
And there was going to be, I don't know if you've ever seen, there was going to be a reprisal of Over the Rainbow when she's in the castle.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll go more in depth to that when we get to that whole sequence. But yeah, I think there were more songs that were going to be towards the end, but they all got cut. And so, yeah, the musical aspect of the movie just sort of just stops in its tracks without any conclusion. And I just always thought that was interesting because no one seems to ever realize it. I think it kind of goes to show how effortless and seamless the musical aspect of the whole movie is.
Mm, yeah, and I think to be
But
fair,
yeah,
my favorite song from this film is the optimistic voices, which is like after the next scene. I don't know why.
oh yeah, that whole scene.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
why I like that song.
yeah, we can go into that whole scene now because I think when they see Emerald City and there's that really triumphant music, it feels
Yeah.
like they've been through a whole journey, but there's been 3 scenes.
Yeah, actually, yeah, the trials haven't even started yet, have they?
It's so bizarre because especially as a kid, it feels like so much has happened and it took forever for them to get there. But they're there in like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's a lot more that's happening in the book to like stop them from getting to the Emerald City.
I don't think they could have done this back in the day, but I think a more modern version of the story would kind of benefit from having, more adventurous stuff happen before they reach Emerald City because there's the whole stuff about them going to the witch and all. And movies, especially back then, were strict on runtime, and it's
Yeah,
always more strict when it's kind of a family movie.
yeah,
But yeah, I think despite that, the movie still kind of does a good job of it does a really good job of tricking you into thinking that it's been a super long time and that it's this huge like, oh, we made it after all this even though almost nothing happened. The music is really good at tricking you into thinking that it's been a long time.
yeah, definitely.
I have to wonder how long Dorothy was in Oz too, because in the book we know it was like a while, but in the movie you could almost get the impression that she was there just one day. But then when she wakes up, she says it's been days and days. So there could be a whole bunch of stuff off screen that they did that we didn't see. So I guess we'll never really know how long it actually was. But in the movie, it's literally like 20 minutes and they get there.
Yeah, well, I guess as well, judging from the painted backgrounds of the yellow brick road, even like getting to Scarecrow, it looks as though they've been through hills and hills and hills each time.
Yeah, I
So,
think
yeah,
I think you could maybe argue that Dorothy and Scarecrow they had maybe they had a few days where they were kind of going on those hills and down the Yellow Brick Road, but going from Tin Man to Lion to Emerald City, like they make it very obvious that it's like the same path in like one like in just a few minutes.
yeah, definitely.
So it's sort of interesting how that sort of imbalance. I do wonder if you restructured the movie to make it to where before they ever get to Emerald City, they go to the witch first and then they don't see the wizard till the very end. I wonder if that would be any better or any worse.
Yeah, I feel like in my childhood mind, I kind of switched off after they got to the Emerald City because it feels like you say, it's been this whole journey, and the point is to get to the Emerald City. They get there, and you feel like, oh wait, there's still half of the movie left to go through. But yeah, I guess in a more traditional sense, it would make sense that the very end goal is to get to the city, and they make it, and they're safe, and they live happily ever after, or whatever, or they get sent back home. Um, but yeah, it does. It does, and I guess that's a good example of like music, like you say. It does make you feel like it's been a huge journey to get to that point.
Yeah, music just has this weird effect on people because it's the only art form that injects itself in every other art form. It's because music is in movies, TV shows, and video games, and music is its own genre. So it's sort of interesting seeing the power it can hold in that regard. And I think the poppy fields, I think the setting just by itself is really it's really beautiful. The poppy field, it could be like its own painting or something.
Yeah,
And I've always found the idea of the poppy fields. It's another one of those eerily beautiful things because it's this whole field of these beautiful flowers, and you could just go there and sleep there forever, and nothing bad would really happen to you. But like you obviously would want to still live, but it's also oddly peaceful.
yeah. Have you heard the theory about like fields representing drugs? I can't remember where I heard it, but they were saying like how you could look at the Wizard of Oz film as like an example of the life of a human, and the idea that you're working towards a goal and you're almost there, but like life sends tests, and like the poppy field is just you wanting to indulge and just relaxing and just saying, oh, just let me lay down for a moment, but you're really close to your goal, and it's kind of like sabotaging, like giving into like drugs or some sort of substance abuse. I can't remember where I heard that, but I heard it somewhere. I was like, oh, that's interesting, like way of looking at it.
I really like that analogy. It could kind of be like a thing that represents procrastination or something.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
think it's a testament to how the story can throw these like just by themselves. They're literally speaking really beautiful and intriguing ideas, but they're even more intriguing by the fact that they kind of have these metaphorical, kind of relatable themes to them.
yeah. Poppy field, the poppy field, like you say as well. It's just such a really interesting visual and just such a nice visual of just like a field full of poppies.
Yeah, I think too. I'd always imagine like uh, I don't know if I've like read this before or where I came up with it or something, but I always thought it was kind of this bittersweet idea that when the characters pass away, or even like the actors who play them pass away, they just kind of go in a poppy field forever.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, because I don't know, it's sort of course, it's like kind of creepy in a way, but it's also kind of nice. Like all four of them are together and they're in their poppy field. They're just relaxed, not doing anything.
Yeah. We have another thing in the book. I feel like it wasn't in the book. The poppy fields, they were rescued by mice. Who,
Yeah, I kind of wonder if that would have been better than Glinda doing it because it is sort of weird that Glinda only helps at that point and can maybe feel like Deus Ex Machina. But I think the mouse thing probably wouldn't look very good at all back then, I imagine.
how would you
So I
even
think it's
do that?
probably all they could have done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also love the music during that whole sequence. It's so good. Glinda saves them by making it snow, and I'm wondering what exactly did the snow do?
I know. I think I was thinking about this. I feel like as a child, I kind of assumed that the reason that they were falling asleep was the poppies were giving off a certain scent, and maybe they were buried. Now that the poppies were buried in snow, like the ice or the snow kind of covered the smell of the poppies. I don't know why I always felt it was a smell, but um, yeah, it doesn't really make sense. Also, the witch when she's casting the spell, it's like she's grinding something in a pot, and she holds the pedestal thing um over the crystal ball, and that somehow makes the poppy field all of a sudden like make people sleepy. Um, it's like an interesting way of like fooling you into think that she's actually cast a spell, but it doesn't actually show her casting a spell, just more like talking about it.
It's interesting too because it's as if the witch can just cast spells wherever she pleases, and I wonder too,
Yeah,
her crystal ball. I guess she can just see whatever she wants. So she has so much power over Dorothy, but she's not just going in guns blazing. She kind of has this methodical approach of getting her, almost
yeah,
as if it's more satisfying for her, or if she has some kind of she's an evil witch, but she has a grace in how she operates.
yeah,
So yeah, but when they get out of the poppy fields and we get into optimistic noises, I do really like that song. It's a bizarre song, but I really like it. I don't know what it is that I like so much about it. I think it just feels almost um it feels very gleeful and triumphant, but in a way that almost feels ironic.
yeah. The more like obviously you're not the more you pointed it out, they've not really gone through much to get there. But the optimistic that part, it feels like it's talking about like you're out of the woods, you're into the light, and like you've made it, and keep going further and stuff. So it's like nice. It's a nice like sentiment, but I guess it's kind of at the wrong point in the film because they haven't really gone through much. But it's just it feels very of that time and very old Hollywood, and it doesn't feel like it fits in with the rest of the film songs. But I always quite liked that.
Yeah, it's I think it's so optimistic and so happy that it almost feels like it's creepy in a way to us because to like more modern people because of our cynicism, but it really is a beautiful piece. It's something that I think you'd want to play after you've conquered something or you've done something that you've wanted to do for a long time or you've
Yeah,
reached some sort of goal. I think it sounds really nice. When they get to Emerald City, I think the most interesting thing about that to me is it doesn't really look like a city. It just looks like this big building that has a lot of people in it.
yeah. I was thinking the same actually, watching it this time, and I think it's the first time I've really thought of it. It seems like a huge kind of palace or like a huge society living inside indoors. Um, but you see, obviously, you only see like a small part of it. But yeah, it's not actually a city. It seems like one giant castle or something with like loads of people living inside.
I think it's sort of an example of the limitations they had at that time because it looks great, but I find the illustrations and the depictions in other media, well, some other media of Emerald City, where it's actually a full, fleshed out and lived in actual city to be more interesting.
Mm, yeah, I guess you kind of just take it as face value when you're a child, but like looking at it as an adult, it's a weird thing to see it as like not an actual. It's not a city. It's like one building.
And the building itself is very odd. It looks very alien, but I do love that because I like the illustrations where Emerald City is just kind of this huge green building, but I like that it doesn't even really look like a building. It makes it more believable that this is actually another foreign world that operates on a completely different level. Like it's just completely alien.
Yeah, it always kind of reminds me of like something you would see in Superman almost, just like
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
yeah. It's it's interesting actually to think they went down that route actually, that they just decided to not draw a city but like a load of domes almost. It seems like a lot of domes and like lines and shafts almost.
I think it's one of the more unique and believably fantastical elements
Mm.
because if somebody was designing the Emerald City, I don't think they would go to something that looks so bizarre and out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I was gonna ask you actually about they when they knock on the door and there's a guy who is the same actor as the wizard. Do you feel that that's just the wizard and every day he just disguises himself as random people in the city to be amongst the
That's
people?
that is such a good question because I've always wondered that myself, and I can't tell if it's just kind of a joking thing, like oh, it's the same actor doing all this, and like a stage thing, like how they do with theater. But I honestly like to imagine that it's the wizard the whole time.
Mm. And that's how he just like integrates himself into society so he doesn't have to be alone all the time.
Yeah,
Because
it even makes. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say I noticed this time when I mean it happens a little bit later, but when he finally lets them into the wizard, he's like crying and he opens the door and they walk through and then you never see that guy again. So it's like he just literally disappears. He's not even behind the door.
Yeah, I just think it's so much more amusing and it kind of fleshes out his character in a small way to imagine he's this guy that just he's sort of forced to be in hiding because he's built himself up to be this character, this hugely powerful on another level, on another realm being. So he just kind of goes around in disguises, checking on everything. I really like that idea.
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool. And I feel like this is one of I guess we'll see you more thoroughly when we see the other adaptions, but I can't think off the top of my head of other adaptions where you go to the Emerald City and it's full of people like the people of Oz all dressed in green. Um, I'm thinking about the Return, not Oz the Great and Powerful, and
Right, yeah.
it seems as though that Emerald City is completely deserted except for the witches and maybe animals or something. But um, and I feel like in Return to Oz, there's a scene at the end with like all the people from Oz, but I feel like this is one of the few ones where it's like literally everybody's in green, everybody's wearing emerald, and there's a lot.
Yeah. Out of all the live action versions, Return to Oz is probably the one that feels the most like an actual lived in diverse city from the
Yeah,
brief we see. Although even then it just kind of seems like a big room.
yeah, yeah,
I think I think too, you mentioned Oz the Great and Powerful, and of course, we'll get into that now. That'll be its own thing. But um, of course, it was very much trying to be like a prequel to this movie, even though it's officially not.
yeah,
Um, but when you look at it like that, it does make sense that the wizard has to use these disguises, and he can't really ever be seen in his actual this how he actually is. It kind of adds that layer of it was just a young guy who kind of just faked his death in a way to be this huge wizard like being, and it kind of adds another layer of urgency to his character of having to hide away and all those years of faking this until he finally gets revealed.
Yeah, yeah, it's cool. It's a cool scene actually seeing him play the different parts of the people in town. It was a bit weird watching it this time as well, feeling uncomfortable for the horses that were like literally dyed colours. But again, the time period, like how else would you make? I don't know how much pain the horse would have been in, but it just feels weird that they've dyed a whole horse or they've painted a whole horse for like a small kind of gag that doesn't really go anywhere, but it's like a nice to have gag. But it feels like a lot of effort to have like 4 or 5 different horses painted different colours for that scene.
Yeah, they totally could have just not had that whatsoever, but I think they probably knew that for the movie to be as successful as it was, they had to put in all these little details just to make it seem believable, especially with their more limited resources. And yeah, a lot of the times it seemed like it came at a cost of what's morally right.
Yeah, I
But
guess they utilise the fact that it was in full colour as well. So maybe just the idea of having a horse in several different colours would have been like, oh, it's just going to be like an extra novelty. The fact that audiences will see a horse for real in full colour this time.
yeah, definitely. Um, I find the Emerald City that they go to in general, it's sort of interesting. When they get all dolled up and stuff, it's almost as if the Emerald City has this kind of this like place where you can be groomed, and it's just super fast, and everybody looks super dolled up and super just kind of fancy looking.
Yeah,
And I guess I don't know if it's Emerald City or the entirety of Oz, but everyone in Oz just there's never really any dullness in the way they dress. It's all very flamboyant.
yeah, actually. Um, Yeah, I this was one of my favorite scenes as a child. Is like them all getting like the Tin Man getting like buffed up and looking really shiny and stuff. And I noticed this time that I feel like the Scarecrow didn't get much of an upgrade. He just got restuffed and he looked exactly the same. But everyone else kind of got their hair done. Um, and interestingly, it's just kind of clicked that I'm sure in the book everybody in the Emerald City wears green glasses, so it looks like everything's green. And I feel like they give her a green dress to wear, and I was surprised that if they want to paint horses for the fact of like showing colors, that they didn't give her a new green dress to wear in this scene of the film. But she looks nice with her hair done.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. I think like the glasses thing for one. I think on one hand in the story that's a great way to kind of further show how the wizard fakes stuff. But on the other hand, it kind of undermines the fantastical nature of Oz. So I think I'm
Uh,
glad they kept it away and kept it out of the movie, especially
yeah,
because there's less uh fantastical stuff they can show off in the movie. So the more they can get, the better.
mm, yeah,
But as far as her dress too, yeah, you would think if they really wanted to show off all these colors, they would kind of give her maybe a new dress or something. But I don't know. I guess they just liked maybe they just thought that was too aesthetically pleasing, or I guess if she has the same outfit, it makes her character more recognizable, like how cartoon characters always keep the same outfit.
yeah. Actually, yeah. Having said that, it's a
I
good
think
point.
too, the blue and the red just goes together. It would probably go together more kind of seamlessly.
And I guess maybe it adds to the fact that she's kind of a foreigner in this land, that she sticks out because she's the only one in blue and white because everyone else is in like green.
Yeah, it kind of is an extension of how the movie was almost before they had switched directors, how Dorothy was too much like everyone else in Oz. So I guess it's sort of a reinforcement that she's just this normal farm girl, whereas everyone else is super dolled up and fancy and fantastical. I have to wonder, even though they don't, get into what the Aussians think of Dorothy, how they would view her when she's so much uh, less fantastical. And I wonder, would they look down on her, or would they, I don't think they would, because I think one of the points of Oz is people are kind of more accepting in that regard, as in scarecrows and lions and tin mans, they all sort of talk with this human girl and they don't think anything of it. So maybe
Yeah.
they see her and they just don't think anything of her.
Yeah, maybe they just kind of view her more as like a child or like an innocent, like being sort of like happy to have her around or happy to dress her up or help her out. It feels like everyone again, like you say, you just go there, get groomed, and like get everything upgraded, and it's free, and people are just happy to do it because that's the place it's to be done.
Yeah. So let's see. I guess next we could talk about the whole lion, king of the forest routine.
Yeah, this is this. I like hate this song. I don't know why. My mum absolutely loved it, and she would like mimic it and sing it as like when I was a child. And she said it was like her favorite song in the film, and she used to think the lion was so funny. But like, I always hated this song. I would usually fast forward it. Like while watching preparing for this, I didn't, and it wasn't probably as bad as I thought it was going to be in my head. But I just find it bizarre that obviously he's not really a singer, and I'm guessing he wasn't known for his voice. But it's weird that they would give him kind of two songs. I know, like above everyone else. I guess Judy Garland sang more than once, but it's I don't know. I just like why out of the three companions does he get his own extra song about how amazing life's going to be when he gets his wish? And
Yeah, it's interesting too because I talked about how they cut out the "If I Only Had a Brain" dance,
yeah,
but they kept this in. But it would have made more sense in reverse, because the "If I Only Had a Brain" dance, I mean, you don't really need that, but it's part of the scene that already exists and is necessary. Whereas the lion, "If I Only," or King of the Forest, it's something we've already established. It's this extra song that's just in there, kind of maybe for padding or something, and it's just something that doesn't have any purpose, but they included that. And it also doesn't show any really impressive physicality. The only thing it really offers is that the lion, Burt Lore, really shows off what he does with the funny stuff he does with his voice. But even that you
yeah,
could do in a way that's not a 4 minute musical number. So I just find it interesting they cut the "If I Only Had a Brain" dance, because it was, it wasn't really necessary and it was probably too long for the movie. But they kept this in when it kind of just grinds to a halt for this thing that has absolutely nothing to do with the story, really.
How do you feel about the song in general? Do you not mind it, or do you like it?
The whole sequence, it's not like a bad sequence per se, but it's not really necessary and it's not really catchy either.
Mm,
So I
yeah,
think, the other songs are kind of infectious, and this song's not really something that like gets stuck in your head or becomes an earworm or anything.
yeah. It's yeah, it's interesting. I don't know why, but it's that.
I think it's interesting because for such a beloved and competently structured movie, it's very unnecessary and just kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's I think too they could have used that 4.5 minutes that they used for King of the Forest, and they could have used it for something more adventurous or something more interesting.
yeah, they could. I mean, it's cool that they make the cape out of like the weird carpet that's kind of grass and flowers. It's like kind of a carpet, but not carpet. But and they like he smashes the pot and it turns into a crown. It's all like really cute, and I like the idea of like him having that as a cape and just like I suppose it's nice the fact of like before going to say like an interview or before meeting something or someone really important, you might have to be in the waiting room and you're trying to like distract yourself and relax a little bit. So it's nice in a way that they're all like having fun and just like distracting themselves together and like playing along with this, like dressing him up and bowing down to him as though he is the king. But why? Right, it's
That is a really good point. The comparison of like a waiting room and kind of calming your nerves, and I think it's
yeah,
a good show of their friendship. How they're hyping him up for this, and it's cute
yeah,
how they make his crown and his cape. But I think the way it's presented, they don't like you don't really necessarily get why it's happening. I think maybe they didn't even really need to cut it. Just kind of
mm,
maybe they could have gotten across why it's happening better.
yeah,
And I don't think every single thing needs to matter to the story, because if that was the case, then movies would be boring, because sometimes there's stuff you just want to have it there because it's nice or it's cool, and not every single element is vital to the story. But yeah, it is sort of interesting that it just kind of just seems like this unnecessary moment that is irrelevant to like anything else.
So this is the point where they've already like they've arrived at the city. The witch has put the message in the sky as well. So they've gone. They go to the wizard, and he says you can't see them. But then she says, "I'm Dorothy," and he says, "Okay, wait here." And then he returns and says, "You still can't see him." Am I right?
Yeah, it's. I think I really like the tension before they go in there, and the slow stepping and how they're kind of all huddled together, like just grabbing each other, scared. I think the music is really good. The wizard head and the fire, that all looks really good. They did a really good job at making him an intimidating presence. And I think
Yeah,
if you didn't know the story, if it wasn't like everyone knows the story by heart pretty much, I think it probably would be a surprising twist that he's not really this all powerful being. And I like the way he's presented, and like the names he calls Scarecrow and Tin Man, how he's kind of taunting them, and you can kind of just imagine the actual wizard uh, behind the curtain, just like having a blast, just pretending to be this kind of supernatural force.
so I have a question about this as well because this is something else that I was thinking about. Do you think that well, they say like nobody gets to see the wizard, and I'm guessing for the most part he does a good job of like warding people off and not being able to see him. Do you think that this kind of floating head and this theatrical thing, this stunt that he pulls, is like a very, 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 very last resort, and maybe it's the first time he's ever used it? Or do you think other people have seen the wizard and come to talk to him, like important people in the past, and he has used it before? Or do you think he's like never used it and this is the first time?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think just imagining the lore and the history of this Oz is fascinating, because we only have this movie and nothing else to go on, so there's so much you can imagine.
Yeah,
I imagine he's probably used it a few times. I can maybe imagine it's like really hard or taxing to use it, so that's why he tries to avoid people as much as possible, because he's not a very potent wizard if nobody gets to see him.
yeah.
So I imagine it's probably really hard to do it, probably because he's just one guy, so he tries as hard as he can not to do it, and only does it if it's someone really important, or if his emotions got the better of him, which is, I think, adds to the theory that the wizard was the same guy, because it wouldn't really make sense if um, he was just unsuspecting, and some guard just let the four of them in.
Yes, yeah.
It seems like he wouldn't be prepared for that, or he wouldn't really accept that either. So yeah, I think it makes more sense in that regard too, that he is all those other people.
Also, I feel like comparing him to the Mr. Marvel or whatever his name is at the beginning, I feel like his cheekbones are really over the top, and I'm like, was he wearing
Oh my god.
prosthetic?
I wonder too. I don't know if it has anything to do with the prosthetic or the facial hair. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I was like looking at his cheekbones and thinking like he's got really big cheekbones. And then at the very end of the film, when they're all reunited again through like the window, his face looks really normal. I don't know.
Yeah, I could imagine too that Professor Marvel. I can almost imagine him being the wizard himself, because in Oz the Great and Powerful, of course, is not canonical officially, but it tries very hard to be. He
Yeah.
kind of has the whole Professor Marvel shtick going on before he goes to Oz, and
Yeah.
I can see the wizard. Maybe he goes back to Kansas sometimes to and I don't know for what reason exactly, but maybe he has some sort of transportation where he can go back and forth. And I don't know how that would work exactly, but because we've always just seen Oz, there's this massive storm that seemingly creates some kind of like portal or something. But
It's
yeah.
thinking about it now, like if that is what they intended to do with him being disguised, it's a shame they didn't kind of bring that into Oz the Great and Powerful. It could have been like a funny part of the character for like James Franco to be doing different disguises and like fooling different people into like building up his reputation. But,
Yeah, there's a lot more intricacies in that movie they could have done, which when we get to that movie, I'll go in more in depth about my thoughts on that. But
yeah,
there is one moment where he is in a disguise, and I think it's like a guard disguise. So I guess that could give some kind
okay.
of to the theory. But it's also interesting to imagine we spend time with that protagonist in that movie and learning that he can be a good person, but we see him in this movie knowing how dangerous the witch is, and beforehand being persuaded by Dorothy crying, and his conclusion is, I'm just gonna let this child go off and face the witch.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point actually, because it's always Glinda that gets the stick, but she never actually tells her to kill a witch. She just says, "Go to see the wizard; he'll help you." And it's the wizard who's the one. So like nobody ever criticizes the wizard for like sending a child to to literally like they say like the only way we'll get it is if we kill her, and they're like, it's just like go then. Um, it's funny he never gets pulled up for that.
Yeah, I think the only way you could rationalize it is if you argued that he just assumed, oh, she won't go to the witch. She would never do that. And he's just buying his time, trying to think of a way to send her home otherwise. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty egregious. He's just, yeah, just go kill this dangerous witch.
What do you think to the wizard as a character in this film in general?
I really like the quirkiness of the wizard, and I think the idea of somebody that pretends to be this massive kind of this illusion is a really fascinating character, and I totally see why that character was picked by Disney to do a movie about. And I think you could probably do a whole series about him, because I think just conceptually the idea of this guy that pretends to be all these things and tricks all these people and is just a master of deception is a really fascinating character. I think he's one of the most, at least on paper, one of the most fascinating characters in the whole Oz franchise. So they don't do a whole lot with him, but I think what you do get is really interesting, despite him not having much of like any emotional character driven moments or any kind of arc or development.
Yeah, and it's I feel like he stands for like usually when you really like wanting something or you're working towards something and then you get there, there's always like not always disappointment, but it's never what you expect it to be. Like in reality, like even if you were say like meeting a celebrity or something, usually it's you can never anticipate what it might be in your head compared to what it is in reality. So I feel like that's like a universal thing about Wizard of Oz is them having an idea of this all-powerful wizard that will cure all their problems, and then they find out in the end that like when the curtain's revealed, it's just an ordinary man. Um, I think that's something that's like really relatable to people. That when you get to where you've been trying to get to for a long time, sometimes it's not what you expect.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a great point. And another reason why this movie is so everlasting, because there's all these metaphorical moments you can equate to happenings in real life. And I think the man behind the curtain thing is one of the most commonly referenced metaphors in the entire movie, if not the most, out of
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
like metaphorical moments. Because there's so many ways you can interpret like meeting a celebrity and they're not what you expected, or they're not as great as you thought they would be, or maybe if you're like estranged from a family member, you meet them, you're not what you hyped up in your head, or really like
yeah,
there's always these political comparisons with the Wizard of Oz that it seems like they aren't actually real and that Elfringbaum didn't have any of that intention. But you could also compare it to like a political figure that's been made to be like, oh, I'm going to fix all your problems. I'm going to make all these grandiose promises, and then when they get there, they don't really do much, and it was all for show. I think that's probably the one that's used most often because the wizard is the closest thing there is to a political leader in the movie. So I think the way it connects to real life is really interesting. So yeah, after they go to the wizard and they're in the haunted forest, I think the most commonly mentioned aspect of um, this entire scene is the fact that Scarecrow has a gun.
Oh yes, I never really noticed before until like this last time I watched it, and I was like, he has a gun, he has a little pistol. Where did that come from? And it's just so like, I was like laughing at it, but I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be a joke or like sincere in the moment. That the where did he get a gun from? It kind of took me out of the film for a moment, but it also made me laugh. I've never noticed it before.
Yeah, there's so many internet things where people will be like, "Oh my god, he has a gun," and it's very memeable. But it makes me wonder too. Like Oz isn't really a place you would imagine having gunpowder or knowing what a gun even
Yeah.
is. Mm, I think they might mention in Great and Powerful that they don't know what a gun is, but maybe I'm confusing it with something else. But I think in every other version, I don't remember ever seeing a gun. But in this universe, I think the Munchkin guards they have guns, and Scarecrow has one. So I wonder where he got it. Maybe the wizard, since he's from the real world, maybe he introduced it to them, or and there's someone in the Emerald City gave him a gun and was like, "If you're gonna go to the witch, you need this gun." Because I don't know where they got all these supplies. I imagine it was probably Dorothy was probably going around saying, "Oh, we're gonna go to the witch. We need help," and maybe some of the citizens were like, "Here's all this stuff."
Because I noticed the lion's carrying like a huge round thing with like a long, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I wasn't sure if it's supposed to be like a mallet or like a, I don't know. He's carrying something weird in his hand and it's got writing on it.
Yeah, it's really interesting and really Scarecrow. If you're gonna give somebody a gun, he might be the worst person to give a gun to because of how jumpy and clumsy he is.
Yeah, it's so
I think
bizarre.
it's
I can't believe I've never seen it.
It's so funny. It's so funny to imagine because, there's all these fantastical ways to defeat the villain, and that's the way that they defeat her in this movie is, fantastical. It's just so funny to imagine they brought a gun with the intention of just shooting her, and just the old-fashioned way. That's how they get rid of the villain.
Yeah.
It's very. I would love to see an alternate universe where he held on to it and just used it when she was cornering them.
I've just I just kind of realized as well in Oz the Great and Powerful when they try to track down the witch, the little China girl has a huge like a knife, and there's like a whole
Oh,
bit like
right.
about. I'm wondering if that's like an homage to having a gun. Like it just seems so out of place to have a gun. I don't know.
And it's not even like a toy gun or magical. Oh, it shoots out lasers. No, it's just a gun.
Yeah, I feel like growing up, I always felt like the film got a little bit boring after the Emerald City, and maybe partly to do with that is because the songs, and like you said earlier, maybe I didn't realize that. So I feel like I've might have switched it off sometimes after the Emerald City and not watched the very very end. So I feel like this last part of the movie is the least that I've seen of the Wizard of Oz.
That's a great segue, though. You mentioned no more songs. Have you heard about the Jitterbug deleted stuff?
No,
You haven't?
no, what was that?
Okay, so you might notice the witch in the movie says, "They won't last long. I'm going to send an insect after them." But nothing ever happens with that. So the whole story
Oh,
is a deleted moment that it was going to be. They were going to animate this, like, kind of, I guess, fantasy looking insect. It called the Jitterbug. And its power is to just to make, like, its intention is to make Dorothy and her friends just dance so much they get tired. And the song is on YouTube. It's a pretty catchy song, I think. I think it's more enjoyable than like King of the Forest. And yeah, basically, there's footage of it, but it's just like footage that was amateurly shot, so it's not the actual film that we have, but there is footage of it.
okay.
And basically, just they're dancing uncontrollably and singing uncontrollably. And I think it's sort of like if you went to some like country bar and they were like swinging each other around, and Dorothy and Scarecrow are dancing together, and Tin Man and Lion dance together. And it's a whole thing. I don't know how it was supposed to be resolved, but it was this whole thing where before she uses the flying monkeys, she first uses the jitterbug to try and stop them.
Wow, I've never heard of this. I wonder how it's kind of sounds out of place while you're explaining it to me. But like, if they'd have cut out King of the Forest and put this in, would we just be like, would this be a classic hit that we all love and recreate it like weddings or whatever? I don't know.
It could be. I mean, the reason they took it out is because the jitterbug was an actual dance move, of course. They don't do the actual dance move, but there's a dance move called the jitterbug, and they took it out because they were worried that the use of the jitterbug would date the movie. So it really shows they really knew what they were doing, and it shows why this movie was so everlasting because they put all this thought into that kind of stuff of how the movie would be dated and how timeless it would be. But
Yeah,
even with that said, I feel like it wouldn't really date the movie that much because I don't think kids would be like, "Oh, that's a lame, outdated dance move." They would just think of it as the name of the insects. I don't think they would really think, "Oh, it's some old '30s dance."
yeah. Which I suppose because Wizard of Oz is so iconic now, it probably would be just attached to the Wizard of Oz. But do you think while they were making this film, they had any idea how big it would be?
I always wonder that, and I guess they must have thought of that if one of their reasonings for cutting the jitterbug was thinking about how timeless the movie would be. So they must have at least wanted it to be timeless, I guess.
Yeah.
But really, I think it's still the most popular, successful, well-known movie of all time. And I think at the end we can talk about whether or not the popularity of it is waning or not. But I mean, it's been like the most watched movie of all time ever since it came out. And even if it, kind of fades, it held on to that title for a really long time. And I don't think anybody could have predicted that, because even when this movie came out, it made a lot of money, but it never got its money back just because of how expensive it was.
Really?
It didn't get its money back until they re-released it 10 years later.
Wow. Ah,
So after that, though, we have the actual moment in the movie, the flying monkeys.
it's weird sometimes in just like pop culture, things get like quoted over and over again. And I always felt like the original quote from this film is like "Fly, my pretties, fly." But I think all she says is just "fly," and I don't know if it's been like recreated and people have said "Fly, my pretties, fly," but I always assumed that it said "pretties," but it never happened this time. I was like, oh, she didn't say "Fly, my pretties."
Yeah, it's sort of that Mandela effect where people conflate certain memories. Like she says earlier, "I'll get you, my pretty," and she says
Yeah.
"fly." It's kind of like a Luke, I am your father thing. He doesn't actually say, Luke, I am your father. He just says, no, I am your father. So I
Oh,
think,
okay.
yeah. So I think people often kind of conflate stuff like that, or they'll say it differently in conversation so people know what they're talking about. And it kind of just spreads, and people just kind of get these different memories mixed up.
Yeah. I think the monkeys look cool again for the time that they were in. I guess they're all just like maybe these were the munchkins that they hired again. The people who played the munchkins, maybe they hired them to play the monkeys, but the monkeys look cool. And it's weird that they're all dressed in like little. Is it called like a bellboy? They look like little, like they work in a hotel.
Yeah, it's one of those very, very random details that I think kind of just another one of those examples. It's made the movie last longer because, like, who would think okay, flying monkeys, I can kind of see where they get that. But like whose idea was it? Oh, they need to be in bellhop costumes.
It was so weird, and you just kind of because it's so iconic and you've watched it so many times, you just accept it. But like, when you sit down and think about it, like, why did they? Why did they? You'd think the natural thing would be to kind of have them reflect how the witch is dressed, and maybe have them all in black or something. But I guess it works. Um, it works. But yeah, they look cool.
My guess is it's just to illustrate how they're like servants for her. But yeah, I don't know. Even in the book, they're not dressed like that. So I think it originated from this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I've
And
just seen a
even
picture.
in Oz the Great and Powerful, Finley, James Franco's little sidekick, he's in a bellhop costume. So I wonder if the implication was that he becomes a flying monkey.
Yeah, it's but then yeah, that doesn't make sense. Again, we'll talk about that film. But the evil monkeys are kind of like baboons and look nothing like him, but he is the flying monkey, but not like one of the evil ones. But there isn't any
Yeah,
other.
it's very confusing.
Yeah,
So the flying monkeys, I do think like the idea of a flying monkey, like they're the smartest, most human-like animal. So I think giving them wings is it's a really good visual idea, and I think that they did a good job of making them frightening with the way they move and the way they sound. When it
yeah,
could have easily come off as more silly.
yeah. And we've got like in the wider shots as well. They look like really detailed little figurines that were like really cute to see. Um, but yeah, they work really well. I can't remember being like petrified or really scared of them. I think I was a little bit scared of the witch, but Actually, maybe that's why I've not seen the last half of the film, because maybe I was like, I feel like I was more scared of the scenery and like the dark woods than I was the witch and the monkeys. So maybe that's why I haven't really seen the second half of the film as much as the first half.
I don't remember ever being like really scared of her. There's always people talking about how they would hide behind the couch and they'd just be really frightened. I don't remember having a
Mm.
phase that was like super like that. The closest I ever got to being afraid of her was when I was like literally in the presence of someone dressed up as her because I don't know if we've ever talked about this or if you know about it, but do you know about the Land of Oz in North Carolina?
Oh, is this the one I saw you made a video about a theme park idea, but it was abandoned? Is this something different?
It's something that actually like exists.
Oh, right. No.
Yeah, I won't go super in depth because we can make that like its own video, I think. But I went there one time, and one of the times I went there, the witch just like popped out of nowhere, it just scared me. And I think after that, I was a little afraid of her, but I got over it. Outside of that, I was never super scared of her. And I was one to get afraid of some stuff that I would see in movies, but for some reason, I was just never super scared by her.
Yeah. Um, I was kind of the same. I was scared of like more or less anything in films, but I don't know. I never saw. I think it was a bit more like creepy, her castle and the dark forest and stuff, than me being petrified. I'm trying to think. Like I was scared of ET as a child. Um,
Yeah.
that he really freaked me out. But yeah, I maybe it was a testament to like her acting, like just being good, but not like petrifying.
Yeah, I remember they said they had to cut out a lot of stuff because she was too scary when they would do test audiences. Like the children would be too scared of her, so they had to cut stuff out. But yeah, I think the Flying Monkeys too. I think it's a good job of illustrating how disturbing some of Oz is because I don't. There's something that is kind of just eerie about seeing these small little creatures chase after Dorothy. She's just this innocent girl that just wants to get home, and they're they're just chasing after her.
Yeah, and as well, the in the forest there's the sign that says like beware or whatever. But there's like a really weird creepy face painted on it, and it almost looks like a
Yeah,
weird.
yeah. I was just gonna say that. I think the sign the witch has is scarier than the witch herself.
Yeah. What did you feel like to the witch's castle and like the witch's kind of domain?
um, I'm not sure really. I don't know if I ever thought about it too much. I think the thing that kind of always stood out to me is just when Dorothy's locked in the room because I really like the emotion that Judy Garland puts into that. She
Yeah,
was a really good crier, and I think even some good actors kind of struggle with that, but she made it seem very natural, like especially like her lip quivering and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, for sure. She really sold it, and you really feel for her as well. It's not even like you're annoyed at her whining or anything. You just feel very like, oh, just like let her go. Like,
Yeah, I think a lot of times movies will do this thing, kind of dubbed it the quote unquote sexy cry because they don't want to have their actor look too not aesthetically pleasing, I guess. So like, well,
right?
it'll just be the actor with a stoic face with like a few tears dripping down their face. But I really like that in this movie they had her just very naturally like actually sobbing and just crying like someone actually would in like a desperate situation like that.
Yeah,
I think that moment really is a good example too of Dorothy, just her character, because I mentioned the complaint about how people say she's not proactive enough per se, and I don't know, like it sounds to me as if they wanted her to be stone cold and just immediately find a solution, but that moment would just not be as impactful if she just immediately found a solution and she was just super just stoic and badass and she doesn't even care. It's whatever. I mean, if she didn't have that emotion, you wouldn't feel connected to her. It would just be like, okay, she doesn't care about anything. She can just get out of here by herself. I really like that she's completely vulnerable and lost because if you reversed it and she just acted just like she does in the book, but in live action, and she just was completely fine and was not like sobbing in the way she is, people would probably just call her a Mary Sue or something like that, and she would just be seen as like a very cold character. I don't think she'd be as beloved if she acted the way that some people seem to want her to act.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like what's really nice about this scene as well is like it really shows you her love for like Toto and like how much I feel like most of her crying is well being away from Auntie M and then Toto being taken away from her. And then when Toto escapes, she's like really happy about him escaping because it's like she acknowledges that she's gonna die, but at least Toto's gonna carry on to freedom and she's just really glad for that. And I think it's just nice that you don't have someone like kind of wallowing about themselves, that it's like a big part of it is the love that she has for a dog.
Yeah, it's a good example of how sweet she is because of her smile and her happiness when Toto gets away. Because even very good people would be like, okay, I give up my dog, just don't kill me. Even if they love their dog, people in that situation just, they survival would kick in. But yeah, I really like that too. And I think the whole scene of her breaking down crying in the castle, people say it's just making her a very weak female character, but I really disagree because I think it's just harmful, if anything, to spread that notion that you're not strong and you're not tough if you don't show emotion. And it's something I feel like is usually more of a sentiment with male characters, but I see a lot of discourse where people are like, "Oh, she shouldn't be showing all this emotion. She shouldn't be crying. She should do something." I mean, if you kind of spread that idea that if you're crying or you're upset, it makes you weak somehow, I just don't agree with that. And plus, if you have a movie and your protagonist doesn't have any moment of weakness, like, especially towards the end, then that's a very major problem because you can't connect with a character that's not in any sort of peril or in any sort of down moment. Like any movie, any pretty much any competent movie, the hero has this moment where it seems all hope is lost and they're super vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, completely agree. And maybe like we lose that again sometimes now in films because they're scared of criticism again and trying to do the right thing, but it ends up with characters that aren't as relatable.
Yeah, exactly. I think too a good time. This is a good time to mention. I mentioned the Over the Rainbow reprise. Um, this would have been where it was in the movie, and I've heard the audio of it, and there's new lyrics, and basically Dorothy is singing this to comfort herself, but
Oh,
it's really it's kind of messed up, and it's kind of messed up and disturbing in a way, especially because of the context of Judy Garland's life. But just her singing that to comfort herself while she's just sobbing, it's like they don't try to make it pretty, like, oh, look at her beautiful voice, like she's just sobbing through the song, and it sounds
oh
so
wow.
good, but also so eerie. Just hearing her sob while she tries to sing it.
Do you kind of wish they would have kept it in?
Yeah, I honestly kind of do because I feel like people who connect with this movie or just in general, they always kind of have that moment where they're kind of trying to comfort themselves with a song like that or something they like, but they're too upset or they're crying and it's hard to really do it. I really wish it was in the movie. I think
Yeah.
out of all the deleted scenes, it's the one I'm most confident in that it would have been a good scene to keep.
Yeah.
I think the reason they cut it out was because it was too sad, and I remember reading that even people working on the movie started crying because it was too real,
Jeez.
and I guess as a result, they were like, "We should just not put this in the movie because it's a kids' movie." But I really kind of wish they kept it in because the audio of it, and there's a few kind of low quality pictures of it. I think it sounds really good.
Yeah. That does sound really cool, and it sounds like it could have been quite powerful. But yeah, I guess I've heard other films before, like changing things because they didn't want it to be too sad or too much of a downer.
I think I think it would have been after she sees Annie M in the crystal ball and the witch is taunting her,
Yeah.
which that's a really messed up moment from the witch. I think it's maybe her most or one of her most sadistic moments.
Yeah, it always kind of makes me laugh because like she like leaves the room and then she like does it to wind her up straight away. It's like she hasn't even left the room that long.
Yeah, it just goes to show how much she just loves and relishes being evil.
Yeah, yeah, it's
I
fun.
always wonder how she knew what Annie M looked like, or if the implication was that it was actually happening and Annie M was wondering where Dorothy was, and somehow the witch got a hold of that and was showing it to her. I don't know if her crystal ball would be able to see into other worlds like that, or if she just kind of conjured it up herself.
That's a good point. I like now I'm thinking about it. I think I've always just kind of assumed that it was like in Harry Potter, the Mirror Erised, like it's like the crystal ball knows to show you something that's personal to you. It's an illusion.
Yeah, yeah. I could imagine the most likely scenario being the witch doesn't know what Dorothy is literally seeing, but she just kind of puts this spell on her that will make Dorothy see what she knows.
Yeah, something like yeah, definitely.
Another thing I love about that whole sequence, I love that the way that Dorothy is in peril is just she's just seeing her time run out. It's not something like super obvious, like she's being hung over lava or something, or she's like being tied up or something.
Yeah, because I think as a child I assumed that when the timer ran out, she was going to come back and kill her. But do you reckon there was supposed to be some sort of spell that if she was in that room when the timer ran out, she would die? Because like she leaves the room before the timer runs out, but the timer would still run out.
Yeah, I think I always assumed the latter that somehow when the timer ran out, Dorothy would just immediately die because I figured if the witch could kill her, she would have just done it immediately.
Yeah, yeah,
So I imagine like the idea is that since the witch can't kill her because the shoes are protecting her, that the timer would just kind of make her turn to dust or something, where she just doesn't exist anymore. I don't know, something like that. I really like how Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion interact during the whole sequence where Dorothy is kidnapped. Because it kind of gives a hint of how they interact in the book, and it just seems like these uncles interacting and having this kind of sarcastic banter.
yeah. And it is nice to see them kind of pull together. Um, the fact like Dorothy's the one thing that they all have in common almost, like that they all really care about, or at least on paper. It's nice. And I was gonna say why when they are like spying on the guards. This again was the first time I noticed the guards are all green. They've all got green skin, and for some reason I always imagined they were blue skinned.
Oh,
They
right.
wear like blue costumes, but um, it made me think. Oh, two things. One, like, are the green guards the same species as the witch, or like some sort of like she's taken men and changed them into like her likeness? And two, was this the first time of like the trope of disguising yourself in the enemy's costume to like infiltrate the base? Because I feel like that again is something that we've seen loads of times in films and cinema. I'm wondering if this was like the first instance of it or not.
Yeah, those are two things I was actually going to mention. Yeah, I've always wondered, are they the same species? Are they some kind of subcategory of witch? Or did she just turn them like that so they would kind of fit her whole look? And also, yeah, the whole trope of disguising yourself is like a super popular thing now, and I don't remember it being a thing until this movie, because I can't recall any movies that I've seen before this that do that.
Same. I can't, but I feel like it's just such a generic thing in fantasy and sci-fi now that when you're like spying on the enemy, you dress up as one of their generic guards and like go in.
Yeah, I think the most major movie I can think of that did it after this would probably be Star Wars, I guess. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's been a huge thing for in these kind of movies for a while, but I think I like it best here because I like when the people in the disguise are very obviously not even the same species, but for some reason they just blend because they're wearing the outfit.
yeah, they stand out, and it's I guess it's different that they just as soon as the villains kind of jump on them to take them down, they easily take down the villains, but it's kind of happens off screen.
Yeah, it kind of seems it's the only point in time of the movie where the lion shows off his supposed braveness, but
Yeah.
he's kind of forced to do it. I guess the implication would be the lion is the one who did most of that because he's a lion and they're, I guess, humanoid, I guess. So I guess that's how they were able to take those disguises. But I just imagine, were those guards just running around naked?
Oh yeah, I never even thought about that. Yeah, they've got like really cool elaborate costumes as well, which I guess kind of goes with the monkey theme almost.
Yeah. Also, speaking of all the costumes and the makeup, shortly before this, when Scarecrow has been like torn apart, I think that looks so good. Like it actually looks like he's been ripped apart. I also wonder, like you kind of ask why didn't they just kill them? But at least as far as Scarecrow and Tin Man go, it'd probably be really hard to kill them unless they just brought them to a fire or something.
Completely incinerated them.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
they can rip them apart as much as they want, but all their body parts are still kind of alive and they can be put back together and everything.
yeah, yeah. So maybe that's how they bested them. Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting to see at the end like how they seem grateful that the witch is dead. So like, what are the guards' actual motivations? Are they just like disgruntled workers that feel forced to do something?
My imagining would be they seem so persistent to kill them because I imagine they're afraid of the witch, but once the witch is dead, they have no reason to act anymore.
Mm. Yeah, I guess that
And
makes sense.
I guess story wise, when crafting the story, obviously the most logical explanation would be, oh, well, they've already defeated the witch. They can't just defeat all these guards.
Yeah.
I find it interesting too. When the three men go to get Dorothy, they take the time to take off their outfits.
Yes, it just kind of like disappears almost like the 1 minute in these elaborate outfits and the next minute they're just back to normal. Um I noticed that like it was like a little bit like sudden. And as well the guards when they do the chant thing, I feel like that's been um parodied so many times. in different
Oh
like
yeah.
movies. That weird chant that they do, which is strange to look back and think, oh, that's the thing that people have decided to parody. It could almost be a throwaway like scene, for instance.
Yeah, the movie it's pretty ripe with things that are parodied. It definitely has to be the most parodied movie of all time. Like every scene has something that people quote or reference constantly, pretty much.
Yeah,
Like I don't know of any other movie where pretty much every scene is something people quote or recognize or spoof as much as this.
yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot of, and maybe that like it's a testament again to how iconic it is because it's been around so much. So many people have seen it, and it's like inspired so many people as well.
Yeah, I really like the whole segment of them running from the witch because the music and how frantic they run does a really good job of making it just seem absolutely dire.
Yeah,
And when they get cornered, there's something that feels genuinely really tense about it. I think it's just the combination of the music and the acting and just the way they built up the witch, but it just feels so intense, like more so in like really serious epic blockbusters. It just feels super intense when she corners them.
yeah. When watching it this time, I was getting like seeing parallels to Jim Henson's Labyrinth at the end of
Hmm.
that film. Which I mean, there was little nods to like Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland at the beginning because it was like she was reading those books, but it felt um, very kind of like similar in terms of like running through this castle and like the way the castle was structured and stuff. Oh, the reason why I asked you about the castle earlier is because when I saw like the castle from afar, the outside, I felt like it looked quite basic compared to like the Emerald City and some of the other paintings that we'd seen of buildings and stuff in the film. Um, but I guess it gets a free pass because it's such an old film. But I would have liked to. I don't know. It could have been a bit more spooky or creepy or imaginative.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really why I never put much thought into it. It just kind of looks like any generic uh, evil castle.
Yeah,
I guess you could say it kind of is a contrast to the witch being more dull, but she's not really dull. She's very flamboyant and very just not boring at all. She's quite the opposite. So I think if they ever like in the remake, quote unquote, for example, they could design the castle in a more interesting way, I think.
yeah. I hope they do. That'd be cool. Um, and maybe like a little bit more cohesion between like her and the minions. Although I do like how the minions look, but there's no like the well, I say the minions, like the monkeys and the guards and her. It'd be nice if they all kind of like reflected each other in some way.
I think the witch's castle in the book, it's definitely despite the fact the witch isn't as big a deal, they're in the witch's castle for like a few chapters, I think it is. I remember the lion is locked up and I think Scarecrow and Tin Man aren't, if I'm remembering correctly. But I always found that interesting how they never bothered to try and capture the three of her friends and they just captured Dorothy.
Yeah. What do you mean the monkeys or the guards?
Um, I guess the monkey, since they're the ones who captured her.
Yeah, it's a bit of like I guess the witch says, "Oh, do what you want with the others. Just bring the girl, make sure she's unharmed and stuff." But it's I guess it's a bit of a flawed plan to like leave people who might be able to rescue her.
Yeah, it's sort of that kind of typical flawed villain plan of they got too cocky and they wanted to relish in killing their enemy kind of thing.
Yeah,
So the final confrontation with the witch. First of all, the water, people are always asking, oh, if water's poisonous to her, why would she have water in her castle? But I don't know. I think it kind of makes sense because we have stuff that's technically poisonous to us, but we know not to have it on us or drink it, or we don't have it in places where we often are. So I think you could just imagine that she just was forced to go in that direction because she was chasing them and she just didn't even think about the fact there was water there.
Yeah, and I guess it's the same as like having an open fire or like fire on your cooker or whatever. Like fire burns you, and it's dangerous to have it inside the house, but sometimes it's necessary to like cook food. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's sort
never.
of the same. Yeah, it's like, oh, why would you have a stove? That doesn't make any sense. I don't think that whole quote unquote plot hole. I do wonder though how she functioned. Like, does she use something else to live? Does she not need water? Or does she use some kind of other substance? Or maybe she uses fire. Maybe she uses the opposite because the whole generic way to kill a witch before this in like Salem witch was like you burn them at the stake. But her death is the opposite, just getting water poured onto her. But it's not really like she's necessarily burning either. She's just she's melting obviously because everyone knows that line. It's I imagine she's just composed of something else entirely. I think they give some weird explanation in the book, but yeah, I do really love that it's water that killed her, just because it's so unexpected. It's like water out of everything is what destroys her.
Yeah, it's very like I'm jealous of that era of writing for children because I feel like there were so many ideas that weren't used up back then. Um, that a novelty of like killing someone through water was like kind of groundbreaking back then, whereas now it's just like you're really struggling to find something new because it feels everything's been done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think being envious of the people who got to write stuff early on, like, it makes so much sense because they could do something as simple as making a water kill somebody, and that's just the most fascinating thing ever. And I think people always complain about lack of creativity now, but it makes sense because it seems like everything has been done, and the more that's done, obviously, the less that you can do.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I just love the quirkiness of water killing this powerful witch. And I also really like that people. It's another example of Dorothy being proactive despite what people say, because she doesn't hesitate. She just immediately takes the water to um, put out the fire Scarecrow has, and
Yeah,
it shows she's not a meek little passive character that makes everyone do stuff for her. She grabs the water like immediately, like pretty quick thinking, and saves them. And I also like that she just does it logically to help Scarecrow, because in the book it's sort of just, oh, she's really mad at the witch, so she throws water at her.
yeah, it makes sense that she does it by accident because she cares about her friend.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense in that context for her to use water. So, and I like the added just kind of showing off her good nature, and also just how intense it is to have Scarecrow hype up uh, and foreshadow his weakness so much, and then see him actually be exposed to that weakness. I think
Yeah,
that makes it get to the most tense it possibly can be until we get the climax of just her melting and dying. I love the way they made her look when she melts. That also is a thing that looks shockingly real for when it was made, because it still looks really convincing that she's actually melting, and the way she just screeches out, she really sells it. I like how much of a drama queen she is about it. Like, she even has to be flamboyant in her death.
yeah, it's really like hamming it up, but it feels right. Maybe because you've seen it that many times, but they yeah, there must have been some sort of like trapdoor, but also like a fan blowing up like because her clothes are like billowing out, and it's like her skirts and her dress and stuff. It's just so funny and cool, and it's just really seamless as well. Like for the time, it's a really cool scene.
Yeah, I think the screams she lets out are like kind of brutal. I just
Yeah.
love that part. What I find interesting, after that happens, they just cut to Dorothy back at Emerald City.
Yeah, there's a bit of like a jump in there.
And I said earlier that I think basically the whole thing was there was going to be a sequence where the guards take them back to Emerald City while they're singing that song of "The Witch is Dead." But I wonder when they were getting to the witch's castle, how long did that take them? Was that like a whole other adventure that we didn't get to see off screen? And is that what Dorothy was referring to when she said it was days and days? I have so many questions.
Yeah, because they were transported by flight, but they would have had to like, I guess, walk back. But how far away was the castle from the city? Yeah, that's a good point.
It makes me wonder what else did they face, if anything? Like what other scenarios did they get themselves into? I think it's one of those things that just kind of make it more interesting because it's another thing that's never explained, but you can imagine, and somebody that's a kid could just kind of come up with what happened in between all that stuff, and
Yeah,
that's a really good element, of course, for fantasy.
yeah.
Okay, so going into Emerald City again, how do you feel about the scene where the wizard sort of gives each character these symbolic gestures of having what they actually had all along and being revealed as a fraud?
I always kind of liked it. Watching it this time, I realized how kind of it happens quite quickly, almost like he wouldn't have done it if he wasn't pushed into a corner. I don't know if that was just me being a bit more cynical. I don't know because it felt like he was kind of trying to um, get rid of them until like, they caught him out, and then even when they caught him out, they were like, "Well, you've not given us anything." He was like, "Oh, actually, though, but we can have these presents instead." I don't know. I think it's a really clever in the grand scheme of things. I think it's a really clever way to end the story that they do get what they wanted, but it's not in the way that they felt they needed. Um, but I kind of wish it would have been a bit more like, I guess, sentimental or something. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it highlights the wizard's really eccentric and kind of fake con man personality of kind of just giving them these physical symbolic gestures, but in a way it feels more it is more genuine than what happens in the book, because in the book he just sort of pretends he's actually giving them these things and it's more literal, and he's like, oh, I'm giving you these things, but he's really not. And in this movie it kind of more reinforces the message, and he kind of gives these speeches to all of them saying how they had what they thought they had all along. So I think it's sweeter and more kind of relevant to the message of the story in this movie. But I agree that there's something about the way he does it and just the way he presents himself that still seems sort of slimy in a way. I think it's kind of a testament to the wizard's character that he has all this stuff in this bag, and he just happens to have all this stuff that kind of relates to them, and he just kind of thinks on the fly of, oh, I know what will relate to them, and I know how I can make it about what they want. And I just kind of wonder if that was kind of what he did, like during his entire occupation as the wizard, just kind of having all these fake symbolic things he could give to people and kind of weasel his way out of it.
I wonder if like Linda has actually met him before this and knows that he is like a fake wizard, or if any of the witches or like more important people in ours have ever met him, and he's like put on the whole um, floating head thing.
Yeah, going back again, Oz the Great and Powerful. He and Glinda have this sort of romantic relationship, and so they obviously know each other in that regard. So if you went for the logic of Oz the Great and Powerful, the implication is that there is a Wizard of Oz-esque story that happens after that movie. So I could buy in this universe kind of a similar thing where Glinda knows the wizard and knows he's a fake, but she knows he's not a bad person, so she still kind of um, suggests that Dorothy should go to him. But at the same time, even if she knows he's not a bad person, she must know there's only so much that he can do. So I guess you could say her sending him to the wizard is just kind of more of a, or sending her to the wizard is more of a, just kind of an excuse to have her go on a journey that teaches her a lesson.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do wonder if the higher ups, like, did the witch, any of the other witches know? Did any of the other higher ups in Oz know that he wasn't actually this big, powerful wizard? Or it's interesting to think about. And going into the hot air balloon scene, he's there in his human form, which makes you think he could have easily just said, "Oh, this is my human form, and I can just transform." And he could have just been like that the entire time. But so yeah, I guess maybe because he's leaving, he thinks it doesn't really matter. How do you feel about the wizard's line to Tin Man? Because I've heard people kind of dissect it and say it's like lopsided or not phrased how it should be phrased, or it should be the opposite of what he says. The wizard says to Tin Man, "A heart is not judged by how much you love, but by how much you are loved by others."
Yeah, I did pick up on that as well. I've never noticed that line before. I was thinking, is that true? Is that fair to say? Because I feel like in some ways it's like a nice notion, but then depending on what type of person you're and how many people you know, you might not have a lot of people who love you, but it doesn't mean you're not like a loving person. So
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate quote because it kind of implies that if you don't have like a bunch of friends or a bunch of loved ones, you're not capable of love, or you're like it's for a reason. It's because you're not lovable. I mean, I guess it depends on the context of how it's said, but I think it's a quote that could easily be misconstrued, and it's kind of indicative of this like outdated, strange philosophy. Like it's similar to how Glinda says only bad witches are ugly.
yes, yeah, I guess it's the same kind of energy. Um, yeah, I feel like it almost feels like at the time it was written, whoever wrote it thought this is a genius, beautiful quote, but not what it meant.
It seems it's sort of strange because this movie is, and really the entire story in general is seen as this kind of progressive acceptance because Oz is the antithesis to the real world and it's less judgmental, and there's all these people that are very strange but they just kind of fit together and don't question it. So it's kind of ironic having quotes like that in the movie.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things I guess you just can't think too much about.
Yeah, I think it's as old as this movie is, I think it probably did a better job of having everlasting morals than a lot of other movies could have had.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as the wizard leaving, what I find most interesting about well, first of all, I question how exactly did he plan to get back to Kansas in a hot air balloon?
Well, I don't know. I guess just keep flying until he saw something that resembled. I don't know, because I guess I never really thought about that before. Because I felt like, oh, he was brought there by the wind, so it must be like not too far away from Kansas. But yeah, it is a bit aimless to be float. She could have been floating in that balloon for like years with him. Maybe he did her a favor by letting off without her.
Yeah, because my impression of Oz travel, it's always sort of been it's this place you can't really get to, and it's just the storms sort of open up some sort of black hole or vortex that transports you there. But you could also
Yeah.
look at it as it's and the books kind of explain it. It's on Earth, but it's blocked off by a giant desert, and you can only access it through the tornado kind of blowing you there. But I've always kind of preferred that it's not really on Earth. It's just this thing that you can't access unless something just kind of rips it open. But I don't know. There's different ways you could go about saying it.
Yeah, and I suppose, well, in the context of this film as well, it implies the film implies that it's not even a real place, and kind of leaves it more open-ended. Whereas I feel like in the book, it's more concrete that it is a physical place that Dorothy travels to.
In the book, it's very clear because her aunt and uncle are like, Where have you been?" And Dorothy just kind of comes running up to them. So it's very clear in the book that it's a real place. Uh,
Mm.
so yeah, Oz travel, that doesn't, I don't know how that would work, just him and his hot air balloon. And I don't know how he would even navigate Kansas because none of them know what that is. And it's not, it doesn't seem they know what Kansas is. It doesn't seem they would know how to get there. So I don't know what his whole plan was there. But what I find possibly more interesting than that is the fact he makes Scarecrow the king.
Yeah, but it does seem kind of like a whim, but it kind of makes sense in the context of Scarecrow seems to be the smartest or level-headed person, so he entrusts it to him. Or do you think it's just like out of the blue?
And he did lead the entire time through all their shenanigans. So I guess it makes sense.
Mm.
But it's sort of like he was ruling over Oz for presumably a very long time. And he just sort of leads it to this scarecrow that has only known a cornfield and the adventure we see in the movie. It's like there's so many little details into ruling a place. So even though the scarecrow could be as smart as possible, but he's got his work cut out for him. Unless, of course, maybe Oz is just very low key, and you don't need much to rule over it. And it's not convoluted like the real world is, and you just kind of maybe rolling something is very much a lighter thing than it would be in real life. Yeah, he just leaves them with just one very small speech, and it's as if he got exposed and was just no longer interested in keeping up the charade. It was just kind of boring to him at that point. So he just is like, you know what, I'm just gonna go home now. Because it really is kind of a spur of the moment, random thing that he just says to Dorothy, okay, I'm gonna go back to Kansas now. Like he must have some reason for it, and I imagine the only reason that really makes sense is he knows he's exposed, so why
Mm.
stay?
Yeah.
There's no one he can really con anymore. Because why? It's not like he has any emotional reason, like just seeing Dorothy. Like, oh, I see this girl from Kansas. I should go back there now because she wants to go back.
Yeah, you got a good point there. He should have really made a better choice, but then again, I guess given his nature and stuff, he probably doesn't really care too much about who rules us. I don't, I don't know, because it comes across as like him being. They do say that he's a really good man, even though he's not like a wizard and he's not what he says he is. But I do get the feeling sometimes he doesn't really care that much about people because he doesn't seem to care while he leaves Dorothy, and he doesn't seem to care when he tells them to kill the witch. So maybe he didn't care too much about who actually would be in charge. Mm, yeah. Yeah. He is a strange, is an unusual character. He's not one of my favorite characters, and I guess when we go on to the other films, we'll talk about him a bit more. But like, I, yeah, he's not someone that I've ever like connected to, and I think probably because of that reason that he just seems kind of like a bit random and self-serving.
Yeah, he definitely has a selfish vibe to him, which again, going back to Great and Powerful, since they wanted that to be the prequel to this movie, like very badly. Clearly, it doesn't make for a good arc because that whole movie he's learning to not be selfish. But in this movie, the wizard still seems pretty selfish to me.
Yeah,
As far as the goodbye scene, Dorothy saying bye to everyone, I think it's pretty sad because just as far as we can see in the movie, they're the people who have understood her and befriended her more than anyone back home, and she completely uprooted their lives and uh, let them see who they really are, and they have this emotional attachment to her. So I think it's pretty sad when she says goodbye to all of them.
yeah, it's a really really sweet moment. And like you say, I think in the beginning of the film, although there's like a sense of her being close to her uncles or the guys on the farm, it's like there's a sense of nobody really listening to her, which is like saying she needs help. Whereas in this film, I suppose, especially with Scarecrow, um, there is that connection and there is that back and forth where they all really like look after each other and care for each other. So it is a really sad moment seeing them say goodbye to each other.
Yeah, especially like you said with Scarecrow, I think it's definitely the saddest part. And I see people will be like, "Why did she say I'll miss you most of all?" But it makes total sense in the context of the movie, I think.
Mm.
I do have to wonder though if Tin Man and Lion heard her say that and what they would think of it.
Yeah, I think they would be fine with it. I don't know. Like, I was just thinking, I know they're really limited for time from before they get into Oz and after they leave Oz, but um, I guess it would have been a nice touch if they would have the counterpart to Scarecrow would have been like her big brother or something, or like really close to her, and you could see that in the very beginning. But I suppose you don't really need it because of Scarecrow. But um, yeah, it's just like nice seeing their closeness.
Yeah, they had that element in the script of how she had this sort of implied romance thing going on with Scarecrow's counterpart. But I guess as the development went on, I imagine Scarecrow hadn't been casted at that point, and they were thinking he'd be younger. I
Oh right,
imagine. So I guess that's probably how that whole thing went about, but I'm not sure. But that's what everyone seems to kind of guess.
right.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting her saying all those goodbyes, and everyone else's lesson is um, you had what you wanted all along. But for Dorothy, her lesson is what you wanted is right, and there's no place like home. And considering she wants to go back home for the entire movie, and then at the end she gets what she wants, you could make the argument that a better arc, in a way, in some ways anyway, would be she realizes that the home she was looking for is with the friends she made in Oz and the people in Oz, because they're the ones that understand her, and it's the place she wanted, the kind of place she wanted to be. And so I don't know. I think it's kind of a complex thing because I think it's sort of a real life comparison is just when you really want to get away from your home and you're really sick of everything, and you have all these adventures and you meet all these different people away from home, but at the end of the day you kind of will always have this fondness for your home and where you came from. I think even if someone just had a really bad home life, they can kind of relate to that, even if not quite as literally.
Yeah, it's one that I always kind of struggle with the statement, and I don't know if it's because it was more. I feel like it was more of its time that people would really appreciate being at home and staying there. But I feel like someone who, to be fair, I didn't have a great home life growing up, and I did want to like leave, and I have, but I don't. I do get what you're saying. There's always, no matter where you grow up or like what circumstances you grow up, there always is going to be a little bit of nostalgia. Um, but yeah, I never quite understood in as a child watching it. Like she's come to this amazing place, and obviously she's close to her auntie Anne, but she's come to this amazing place, made these really good friends, and she wants to go back home forever, and she's okay with that. But I never really understood any of these, like Alice in Wonderland or like Peter Pan, when these kids would go to these fantastical places and then always want to go back home. Like I never understood that as a kid, and I think as an adult, I kind of understand the reason that that story has been overdone in so many like children's books, but I'm not sure if I necessarily like resonate with it or agree with it, because I feel like in reality, if people went to an amazing, fantastical place like Oz, they wouldn't be begging to go back home. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we see of Oz in the book, it sort of seems like this moneyless kind of utopia. And I mean, in some
Mm.
ways, it would be worse than the real world, but in other ways, it'd obviously be way better. But I don't know. There's part of me that feels like the message of the movie is sort of convoluted in that sense because on one hand, the no place like home message is really good, and on the other, it sort of does feel like Dorothy found who she really is in Oz, and I think there is a satisfaction in a story where it kind of closes with, uh, you know, you never really need to go back to where you came from, and you kind of can stay as a changed person. And more literally, yeah, it would have been messed up if Dorothy just let Annie M and Uncle Henry, um, just let her think she's dead or missing. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about it because if you did that, you'd have to kind of frame the movie as in Annie M and Uncle Henry are more explicitly bad people, and there wouldn't really be the same kind of wistfulness to the movie and Over the Rainbow and just kind of the way it ends. So, yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the whole kind of situation of if she stayed there, would it be better?
It's kind of glossed over at the end, but I did mention earlier, like people weren't really listening to her at the beginning of the film, but the only reason that she was kind of in any sort of discontent was because she was really worried about the safety of her dog. So that was the only reason that she ran away from home, was to like keep him alive because he was being threatened to be killed, and there wasn't really anything anybody could do about it. And that's just kind of ignored as though, like, if she came back home and Mrs. Gulch had kind of come to some sort of compromise and said like, oh, the tornadoes made me see there's more important things in life than picking on you or something like that. It might have been a better tied up bow. But I feel at this point of the film, you've gone on such a journey, you kind of forget the reason that she left home in the beginning, and she comes back and says, "Oh, I'll never leave home again." And you're like, "Oh yeah, that's really nice," but there's still they need to resolve the fact that this dog might be killed, but they don't really address.
It's really easy to forget because there's so much that goes on in Oz. It just kind of feels like the movie's over. But there is that hanging thread that they don't really mention. I guess you could. I feel like I read somewhere that the implication should be that Miss Gulch died because of the tornado, but I don't
She's
know. That's one way to end to end the story. Oh, don't worry about Miss Gulch; she's dead. But yeah, I think they could have just had one line of just offhandedly saying, "Don't worry about Miss Gulch or the tornado." Because I mean, I guess it does make sense. You would imagine if there's a tornado, Miss Gulch isn't going to care about the dog anymore. But yeah, they just don't even mention it.
No.
So yeah. So when Dorothy wakes up, I really like the sequence of her going back because it seems really trippy, and I just love the visuals of that and the music they play.
Yeah, it is pretty cool actually.
And then the whole thing about it being a dream. I know everyone says, "Oh, it's definitely a dream, obviously a dream," and there are good reasons to think that because her hair is back to normal. She got knocked out, and she just sort of stayed where she was and in the bed, and also the fact that the house is still there. That's the most glaring one. But I
Yeah.
think you could argue at the same time, if Oz is so magical and the ruby slippers can do anything, you could just argue that they just kind of put her back where she was left.
Oh yeah, I guess so. I never even thought about that. So yeah, so the ruby slippers are actually the reason that she's gone back to where she was and how she was. Yeah, that's the power of the magic. Yeah, I've never looked at it that way before.
Yeah, it's like I think you could argue that they just kind of that maybe Annie and Uncle Henry really were worried and Dorothy really was away, but the slippers just kind of fixed it and just kind of had it that she was knocked out and she just wakes up to that moment.
Yeah, that's the power of the magic. Yeah, I've never looked at it that way before, but I think you're onto something.
One of the cartoons that's like trying to be, or maybe I think officially kind of, it's not really canonical, but it's sort of the same kind of universe. She wakes up one night and she sees the ruby slippers are in her closet. I can just
Oh,
imagine that maybe they could have had it to where it's like implied the ruby slippers are still in there in her house somewhere or something, just to kind of make it more of a mystery of if she really did go or not. Because I think, in a way, it kind of is left ambiguous with how she's like so staunch and determined and convinced that the whole thing was real.
and maybe like if it was made nowadays without like if this film had never been made and it was adapted nowadays, then I feel like it'd be kind of a given that the shoes might be the only thing that are left behind that kind of keeps you guessing, oh, did it actually happen? Or I could imagine a scene where she has actually her shoes on and people are like, oh, where'd you get those or something. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I think that's kind of a common almost trope in the whole kind of was it a
mm,
dream thing. They kind of will leave little clues like, oh, maybe it wasn't actually a dream.
yeah.
I think it would have looked cool too. All that sepia tone, and you just see the ruby slippers.
Yeah, it would have been a nice touch, but in some ways, it feels like the end scene is just so quick. It feels like they really wanted to wrap it up, and probably by then you've been in the movie theater for a long time. So, um, it is quite a short scene when she wakes up, and she's already in bed, and she's kind of covered up in bed anyway. So I can understand why they didn't do it.
Yeah, it's interesting too. We were talking about the implications that the moral has. The line where she says, "I'll never leave ever, ever again." I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, again, I feel like this is something that maybe in that time period was more valued, is like children always staying close to their parents and not leaving home, or kind of they do leave home, they like live next door or live down the street. Um, I was thinking actually, my partner the other day was listening to an interview with Madonna from like the 90s or something, and somebody said, "Do you?" I can't remember where she was born, but she said where she was born, and he said, "Do you ever go back and do you miss the people that you grew up with?" And she was like, "No, I moved to New York and I never looked back." Like, but she said, "I go back to visit my family, but like I, you move on and you don't look back." And I feel like that's more like accepted now, that people grow up and they want to get away from maybe where they were at the beginning. But um, to say, "Yeah, I'll never ever leave again," is pretty strong. But I feel like in that time period, it was maybe more valued than it is today.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of probably the angst of the moment because she had to went through all that. So I guess she was very emotional and dramatic about it. But I would like to imagine that the character after the movie still would have gone on somewhere else to a big city or something and kind of,
Mm.
not just stayed in Kansas the whole time and kind of stayed true to her need for adventure and, still went back to Kansas sometimes. But I don't know, the idea that she had this dream and then she moves on with her life and just has this very mundane 1900s life and lives through all this stuff is very like sad to me because we don't know if this movie takes place when it's supposed to and when it came out in 1939 or if it takes place during the book period in 1900. But
Ah.
yeah, so that kind of makes me wonder if she would have lived through World War II and all this stuff. It's weird to imagine the character going throughout history and just kind of living normally after she had that supernatural experience.
Yeah, I guess this is a good thing about the books is like you said, it's established Oz is a real place, and people go back and forth, and not just Dorothy. And actually, last night I did download the whole library of the books on my Kindle for like a really cheap price. So I'm going to try and delve into them later on in the year and have a look and see if they are good stories. But yeah, I feel like once you open the doors to an amazing place like that, especially from a child's point of view, it's always, like I say, it's always been weird to me that authors would have children go on amazing, fantastical adventures and then desire to come back to mundane reality and be okay with just living a normal life after all that's happened to them.
I have read before that they talked about doing sequels and it was something that was kind of considered, but nothing ever went into any serious development. I imagine because the first was already so expensive, it didn't make its money back the first time. But
Right, okay.
I think the idea of a hypothetical sequel to this is really fascinating because I wonder if they just would have adapted the actual sequels to the book and
Mm.
what the story would be like, what the songs would be like, if it would be any good. I really wonder how that would affect the legacy because the movie is like this singular experience that's just kind of its own thing, and it kind of adds to the legacy and how kind of immortalized and looked up to it is. It's just this one experience. So I wonder if it had a sequel, would that change?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a universe out there, like an alternate timeline universe that has made all 14 films starring Judy Garland. Yeah, because with you mentioning if they did make a sequel, would that been one of the first like sequels in Hollywood? Because I feel like during that time period of filmmaking, it was mainly just singular films.
Yeah, it wasn't really until the 70s when franchises and sequels really became this thing. So yeah, I'd find that really interesting to see if they just how that would have changed the entire course of filmmaking and franchise.
On its own, really, with the Wizard of Oz, if those series of books were written in kind of our time period, they were like the Harry Potters of their time. So it would be really interesting to see like a huge like machine churning out movies based on this fantasy place back then.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And Harry Potter has like a very clear storyline, and The Wizard of Oz doesn't really have that developing arc that kind of keeps you invested. It just kind of goes on in a random way, kind of. So that would have
Yeah,
been interesting. I wonder how many they could have actually ended up making, like with the whole situation with Judy Garland, and would she have gotten like tired of doing Dorothy unless they kind of developed her in a certain way? It's just
yeah,
it's really interesting because it's one of the most famous movies ever, and most big movies like that, they sort of have this material, whether it's an actual sequel or just something that's been written or some sort of spin-off, where you hear of what's happened after the movie. But with this movie, we only really have our imagination and just kind of wondering if Oz was real, what happened after Dorothy left, how did the Scarecrow lead, did they have any other threats? So with we pretty much covered the entire movie. I gotta say, I do really love the music they play at the end with the Over the Rainbow, but just completely orchestral, and it has the higher key. I think it always kind of gives me a good feeling of kind of that nostalgia and just kind of a sense of satisfaction and completion. Yeah, it makes it feel much more like proper escapism because it feels as if you've been on this journey with Dorothy and all the characters, and it feels
mm,
longer than it is, and it feels like more happened than what really happened. And I think
yeah,
it really is a big part of just how immersive the set is and how immersive the acting and the music is, because it really feels like a while. And I don't think there's many movies out there where you go on an adventure like that and really feel it as much as you do with this movie. One other thing I think is kind of interesting, how the credits are really short and they're at the beginning of the movie rather than the end.
but yeah, it is weird to think like that was a thing back in the day. You just sat through like all the credits. The credits, yeah, didn't go on for ages in this film at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, there's even some more modern movies from the 80s up to like the 2000s where opening credits would be really long and they would last a while. And there would also be ending credits, and those always last a long time. It just kind of felt like, why do we need this much time dedicated to the credits that we see twice? Like, I don't know if I prefer the way it is now or not, because I always get annoyed because you have to mentally subtract like 10 minutes off a runtime.
I like when people do really interesting things with credits. And I'm thinking about, I remember the Spider-Man the original trilogy. That I think the sequel had like the credit. No, actually, I think all of them had the credits mostly before the film, or like a shortened version of the credits. But then they would like have images in there with it and like web graphics and spider graphics and stuff. I think if you're doing something interesting with the credits, it's quite fun. And I think that's the only time that I'll apart from like a Marvel film when you know there's gonna be an end credit scene, I'll stick around for credits if they're like been animated really interestingly or if they've done something creative with them.
Yeah, that's interesting because with the Spider-Man movies,
Mm.
they have really long credits in the opening and the credits at the end, and even then it was sort of rare.
Yeah.
And but it's just interesting because it's the credits sometimes a lot of the times really now they don't even have the title in the movie at the opening. The movie just starts,
Mm.
and it's interesting how that uh, just that small detail is kind of swept under the rug. And it kind of feels like movies now, as a result, feel less like events. But with The Wizard of
Yeah.
Oz, I really like how the credits feel like part of the movie. Like I don't feel like I need to take away any of the runtime. A lot of movies now they'll have credits where there's this kind of animated sequence of credits and it looks really cool and it keeps you entertained and it kind of feels like part of the movie. But then after that,
Mm.
they show the normal credits,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
so redundant. It's like, why do we need two of those? You're just adding like 20 minutes onto this movie. So as a result, I feel like The Wizard of Oz is one of the only movies where you don't have to mentally subtract a substantial amount of the runtime. So I like that about it.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So I guess we've covered the entire story. Um, I guess now we can just go into any general thoughts we might have.
I think overall it's still a little bit like maybe just a tiny bit long for me. Like my that's probably my only critique of the film. Um but it's amazing how like how old it is. It still really holds up and it doesn't feel I guess it does kind of feel dated because it's like you can tell it's from that time period, but not dated in a sense that it's hard to watch or embarrassing to watch because the costumes and the set design and there's so much thought and effort going into everything. It's just amazing overall that they came up with this amazing end product through a lot of trial and hard and upset. It's just nice that it really holds up still today.
Yeah, I think they could have done a really good job with the costumes and have it still look really bad and embarrassing nowadays,
Yeah.
but it
Mm.
still holds up really well. And it does have this element where it feels dated in some way because with the way the characters talk, like specifically Dorothy, you can tell it's an older time period, and obviously you can tell looking at a movie when it's older, but it also doesn't really have these hallmarks of the 30s that are specific in any way, and it feels very timeless. And I think that's part of the reason why it's lasted so long is that there are these elements like with how Dorothy and certain characters dress, you can tell it's old, but it never feels distracting. And I think a large part of that is because it takes place in the fantasy land for most of the movie, but it never feels hindered by the fact that it's really old. It's a story that can still exist in really any time period. It doesn't rely on any kind of certain technology from any time period, be it old or new. You could. I've heard people say that they thought it was uh, made as late as the '60s or even really early '70s, just because it looks that good. And
Yeah.
movies kind of had a similar look throughout those years. And yeah, I think that's another testament to that timeless kind of appeal it has. Is a lot of times people will act surprised that it's that old. Like they'll know it's old, but they don't expect to hear 1939.
Yeah, I think when you actually sit down and think about 1939, it is amazing to think they made that. It's just amazing what they accomplished with it. It's crazy. And I mean, I can't off the top of my head. I don't really know that many films that were coming out at the same time. But just to say it's that old, it's insane. That it's still around and it's still widely watched.
Yeah, and that's a whole topic I want to get into right here is the popularity of the movie and how long it's lasted. So it's interesting because this is the most watched movie of all time according to the study, and apparently also, I don't doubt, the most influential. And this movie has lasted so long, and it's this hallmark in pop culture. If you were watching TV, flipping through the channels for a whole day, there's no way I think you could go just a whole day without hearing at least one Wizard of Oz reference. Like it's everywhere. Everyone knows the story. Everyone freaks out if you haven't seen it. It's like the number one. What do you mean you haven't seen this kind of movie?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
and despite all that, I kind of feel like its reign, so to speak, might be fading.
Yeah, I've seen in the past like maybe 10, 15 years that people kind of appreciate it less and less. And maybe it's kind of a peak time for them to do a reboot, and that's why they're doing a reboot. Because I think whether or not the reboot does good, it might kind of inject some life into the old original film again for people to kind of admire it and see how good it is. Um, I feel like for a long time people have been scared. Like it, when I was younger, I used to really want a modern day remake, like, but something totally different that wasn't trying to be an homage to the 1939 film. And I could understand why nobody wanted to touch it because it's just so iconic. But I feel like, yeah, in the past like 10 years or so, it's kind of people are kind of disregarding it a little bit more and not as touchy about it. And I think when it does get remade, people won't be as shocked or as like up in arms as like certain other films being remade, like say, like Ghostbusters or whatever. Um, so it's going to be interesting. The more I've been thinking about Wizard of Oz, and since we've been talking and stuff, I feel like I probably won't enjoy the remake, and I don't think it could ever live up to this kind of feat. But I'll remain like cautiously optimistic. But I think if anything, it'll hopefully inject some life into this old film, and people will love this old film again.
I think what's happened is the movie was released at a time where culture was a lot more unified. Nowadays, there's so much access to every form of media, and there's way more opportunities to publish art. There's streaming, YouTube, TikTok. People can find their own niche sections of art that are separated from everything else, and as a result, our society and our understanding of pop culture is a lot more separated and divided. And with all the newer developments we've mentioned with art, like with self-aware humor, the cynicism, kind of the rebellion against sincerity, and anything that's remotely corny or seen as too wholesome is sort of rejected. So I think modern younger people sort of aren't as interested in this movie. I think the slightly waning popularity of The Wizard of Oz is largely based on the growing cynicism we see in media and the increasing division we have with the way we consume pop culture. I think a musical that doesn't take itself very seriously and is kind of corny and has these wholesome ideas without any self-aware humor and with these kind of obvious stage setups and background and scenery that is clearly painted on and not CGI or these kind of more elaborate special effects. I think a good chunk of younger people in these newer generations don't really gravitate to that as much. And I think the reason it became such a big thing, kind of a step above most movies and their cultural significance, is because it was an event. Every year it was this genius marketing. Back then you would see movies as they came on TV, and as home media and streaming have all gotten more prevalent, The Wizard of Oz in response becomes less special and less like an event.
Yeah, and I think kids, from a kid's perspective and introducing this film to kids, children today are like, they've got so much stimulation in whatever they're watching, where they put their attention. And I feel like The Wizard of Oz is definitely one of those movies where you sit back and you take your time with it and you go on a journey and just have to be quite present with it and just be quiet with it almost. And I feel like it's quite a big ask to kids of today when they, like, for The Wizard of Oz to be competing with like YouTube influencers and like shiny big graphics and like stuff that's like really snappy and in your face. Um, yeah, it's I don't have any kids, but the last time that I think I had to babysit some kids, which was quite a while ago, it's probably like 8, 10 years ago, and I remember putting on some old Disney films for them, like Peter Pan, and they just weren't into it at all. I think I put on Peter Pan, and it was just the fact that it was like 2D animated just really turned them off straight away, and they just couldn't like they didn't want to give it the time of day, but they were used to like I don't know CGI. Because I feel like it's just a given that children have to watch CGI now. So yeah, I don't know. I would like to think that if I do have kids, I would put The Wizard of Oz on for them and make them watch it, and they would enjoy it. But I don't know.
They're so used to this kind of jump cut, manic, snap, snap, snap.
Mm,
Something new happens here, something new is happening here, and they don't want to sit down and watch something like that quite as much. And there's still movies they enjoy, but I think a lot of it too is this movie being as big as it is and no other kind of Oz media being accepted for a long time has kind of
yeah.
both helped and hurt the movie because it makes it, the top dog. It's not rivaled, it's its own thing. But these big franchises like Star Wars and Marvel and Harry Potter and just all that
Mm,
stuff, they have all these spin-offs, they have all these sequels, they have all these different adaptations going on. That's just everywhere. They have all this lore. And The Wizard of Oz doesn't really have that. It's just, you know, the books, this movie, and not much else. There are a few other movies here and there. There's not like a big fandom for Oz. So that's part of why it hasn't really had that kind of presence online and in any fandom. And I think it's contributed to the idea that the popularity is waning. But I think even unless something unexpected happens, I think it'll probably continue to decline in that sense. But it will always be like a significant movie because, of course, you can't erase how big it's been over almost 100 years, and it's always going to be, known as a big milestone and taught in film classes. But it is interesting to me that it's not invulnerable, and that there will be a day when you talk about movies, and if you haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, nobody cares.
But then I suppose it makes it even more special as well that like we can sit and appreciate and talk about something like this because it's like less appreciated by the general more and more. But yeah, well, I guess we'll just see what the future holds for it. But
Yeah, media is unpredictable because trends come back and go away all the time, and people are very reliant on nostalgia, and we haven't really upgraded our trends in a while because 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they all have their own specific fashion, their own specific motifs. And
yeah,
2000s and especially 2010s, there's no specific necessarily motif. It's just we kind of just cherry pick elements of older stuff. It's kind of like we've finalized our trends and it's just this more varied thing. So you never know how the movie could bounce back in the general public. But yeah, I don't mind it too much because just always having a small fandom in general is beneficial to the idea that I have so much more to discuss that hasn't been discussed and all that kind of thing, like the whole thing that we're
yeah,
doing now.
yeah, definitely.
So, yeah. Did you have anything else to say about the movie?
I don't think so. I just feel like no, it's like a really good, solid movie. Did you want to try rating it at the moment?
Yeah. Okay, so rating this movie, I mean, it's pretty impossible because it's such a huge deal to me in my life and is more than a movie. So I'm not sure how I'm gonna rate it. So I'll let you go first.
Okay. If we're gonna shall we do out of 10 or out of 5?
Whichever you feel is best, whichever you prefer.
I think going forward, probably 10 will give me more scope to like think about stuff. So I'll say
Yeah.
out of 10. I'm gonna give it just 10 out of 10 because I feel like I'm going to judge the rest of the films to this film because it's like their first film and it's a really solid film. And I don't think any of the films on our list would be higher than this. I really don't.
Yeah, I
I could
agree.
eat my words later on, but I would give it a solid 10 out of 10.
I'm not a big believer in objectivity with art, but looking at it as objectively as possible and picking apart everything I can as methodically and logically as I can. It's a really solid movie. It's a solid, cohesive story with a clear moral and clear themes and
Mm.
immersive and creative music and imagery and very well done effects. There's things we've mentioned that could technically be counted as flaws or plot holes, but there's something about the movie where I don't care. Because I guess it's not technically perfect. Like we've mentioned some of the quotes, like the heart quote from the wizard and the bad witches are ugly quote, and how Tin Man and Lion aren't really that strong compared to Scarecrow. And we've mentioned things
Mm.
that could technically be improved on, but this movie is just this whole other experience to me. And yeah, I don't know. It doesn't even feel like a movie sometimes. It's bizarre how it feels. So on a scale of 1 to 10, yeah, I would give it a 10 out of 10.